when that is an unapproved structure, and it will have to be removed immediately. The voice, a grating symphony of entitlement and cheap perfume, cut through the quiet hum of the late afternoon. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I had been anticipating this campaign for months, ever since the first beige box was erected on the far side of my property line. This was merely the opening salvo. I continued to methodically prune a dead branch from the ancient oak that had stood sentinel over my family's land for 2 centuries. The satisfying snap of the wood under the loppers was the only reply. "Are you deaf?" the voice insisted, closer now. "I am Karen, president of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association," I said. "That barn is an unapproved structure." I finally turned, slowly. I let my eyes travel over her. She was a woman of ample proportions, stuffed into a navy blue blazer that was fighting a losing war with the buttons over her midsection. A cheap, laminated ID badge on a lanyard proclaimed her title, swinging like a tiny heraldic shield. She held a clipboard, the universal scepter of the petty tyrant, clutched to her chest. Her face was a mask of furious indignation, her mouth a tight, bloodless line. She had marched a good 50 yards onto my property to deliver this proclamation, a tactical error on her part. "Ma'am," I said, my voice deliberately low and calm. "First, you are trespassing. My property line is marked by the stone wall another 200 feet behind you. Second, this barn was built in 1892. Your HOA was incorporated 18 months ago. The barn, therefore, predates your approval process by about 130 years. I let that hang in the air. The silence was broken only by the whisper of wind through the long-leaf pines that gave her subdivision its laughably inaccurate name. There were no pines there, only Bradford pears and sapling maples, all planted in militarily precise rows. Her face flushed a deep, mottled crimson. "That is irrelevant. It is an eyesore and it negatively impacts the aesthetic value of our community. It's dilapidated. It's probably full of vermin. It is a historically registered outbuilding on a multi-generational family farmstead," I replied, my tone still infuriatingly level. "It houses my tractor, my tools, and 0 vermin. Its aesthetic value is a matter of opinion, and the only opinion that matters on this side of the stone wall is mine." This was the moment, the point in any engagement where the opposition has to decide whether to de-escalate and withdraw or commit to a foolish, unwinnable charge. I had seen it 100 times in contract negotiations and jurisdictional disputes during my 30 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. Hubris almost always chose the charge. "You will be hearing from our legal counsel," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "We will have that monstrosity condemned. We have covenants." She spun on her sensible-shoed heel and stormed off, the blazer straining in protest. I watched her retreat, a ship of state foundering in a sea of her own self-importance. She didn't look back. I returned to my pruning. The war had begun, but she had no idea who she had just declared it on. I was Colonel Arthur Vance, retired, and this was my land. I had spent a career defending distant borders. I would have no trouble at all defending my own. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you think this is insane, hit that subscribe button right now and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've got your own HOA nightmare story, I definitely want to hear about it. Now let me tell you how this all started. My retirement wasn't a surrender to old age. It was a strategic redeployment. After 3 decades of managing massive infrastructure projects for the Army all over the globe, dams in hostile territories, airfields on volcanic islands, forward operating bases in deserts whose names I can't pronounce. I wanted only one thing: quiet. The Vance homestead was the only place I could ever find it. It wasn't just a piece of property. It was 180 acres of family history, a tract of rolling hills, ancient woods, and a spring-fed creek that had been in my family since my great-great-grandfather received it as a land grant. It was the antithesis of the sterile, temporary world I had inhabited for so long. The house itself was a simple, sturdy affair of fieldstone and heart pine, built to last. The outbuildings, like the barn Karen had so graciously offered to condemn, were weathered but sound. I spent my first year back methodically restoring them, not to a state of polished newness, but to one of functional grace. I repaired the slate roof on the spring house, re-chinked the mortar in the foundation of the main house, and replaced the floor joists in the old barn until it was strong enough to hold a main battle tank. The work was honest and deeply satisfying. It was my peace. Then came Whispering Pines Estates. A developer had bought the adjacent 1,000-acre cattle ranch and turned it into a master-planned community. Within 2 years, a tide of beige vinyl siding and meticulously manicured sod washed up against my old stone walls. The houses were enormous, charmless things, each a slight variation on the next, distinguished only by the color of their front doors, chosen from an approved palette of 6 depressingly muted shades. It was a monument to conformity, a place where the height of your grass was a matter of public debate, and the presence of a garden gnome could trigger a formal reprimand. I had no issue with them initially. I was a firm believer in the principle of live and let live. My property was zoned agricultural and was explicitly exempt from any covenants or associations tied to the new development, a fact I had triple-checked with my own lawyer before the first foundation was ever poured. The stone wall my great-grandfather had built was more than a boundary. It was a legal and philosophical firewall. Or so I thought. The first sign of trouble was subtle: faint, percussive thuds on weekend mornings, the whining of leaf blowers in perfect, irritating unison. Then came the newsletters, mistakenly stuffed into my mailbox, printed on glossy paper with that vaguely fascistic logo of a single stylized pine tree. They were filled with passive-aggressive reminders about trash can placement and stern warnings about unapproved mailbox decorations. I used them as kindling. The confrontation at the barn was the first direct contact. It was a probe, a reconnaissance mission on her part, to test my defenses. My calm, factual response was not what she had expected. People like Karen thrive on emotional, unstructured conflict. They are bullies who are accustomed to their victims either cowering in fear or exploding in impotent rage. A calm, disciplined opponent who knows the terrain and the rules of engagement is a creature outside their experience. I knew the letter she threatened was coming. It was the next logical step in her escalation matrix. I spent the next week preparing the battlefield. I didn't wait for her attack. I preemptively fortified my position. I pulled the original deed to the property, the county plat maps showing the precise boundaries, and the zoning variance documents that grandfathered my farm into its protected agricultural status. I retrieved the thick binder from the sale, containing the survey I had commissioned, which marked every boundary pin with satellite-grade precision. From a dusty footlocker in my study, a footlocker that had been with me from Germany to Iraq and back, I retrieved a set of supplies: archival quality page protectors, a heavy-duty 3-ring binder, colored tabs, and a label maker. I typed out a title for the label maker: Operation Annoying Neighbor. I paused, deleted it. It was too flippant. This was a serious matter. I typed a new title: Operation Overstep. That was better. It was precise. It was accurate. The first document I placed into the binder was a freshly printed copy of the county's official GIS map, with my parcel highlighted in yellow and the Whispering Pines development in a sickly, pale pink. I drew a thick red line along the legal boundary. This was the line of departure. I didn't have to wait long. A week after our conversation, the mail carrier delivered a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy in my hand, the paper thick and self-important. The return address bore the Whispering Pines logo. I didn't open it immediately. I carried it into my study, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and sat at my desk. In the military, you learn to treat every communication from a potential adversary as a piece of intelligence to be analyzed, not just a message to be read. I slit the envelope open with a letter opener shaped like a cavalry sword, a retirement gift from my old unit. Inside was a single, heavy sheet of cardstock. It wasn't a letter from a lawyer. It wasn't a condemnation notice. It was something far more audacious, far more revealing of the magnificent scope of her delusion. It was a formal notice of violation. The document was a masterpiece of bureaucratic intimidation. At the top, in an elegant script font, it read, Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association, Community Standards Violation Notice. Below that, my name and address, and then a list of infractions. Violation 1. Unapproved outbuilding, barn. Per Covenant 7.4, all structures must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Structure is dilapidated and not in harmony with the community aesthetic. Violation 2. Unmaintained landscape, wildflower meadow. Per Covenant 9.2, all visible landscaping must be maintained as turf grass, mowed to a height not to exceed 3 inches. Violation 3. Improper fencing, stone wall. Per Covenant 8.1, all fencing must be of approved white vinyl or wrought iron design. And at the bottom, the master stroke. A fine of $500 per violation is hereby assessed. Total due, $1,500. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in further penalties, including the placement of a lien on your property. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. It wasn't a laugh of mirth. It was a dry, rustling sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief at the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. A lien on my property. A property she had no more legal claim to than she did the moon. She wasn't just declaring war. She was trying to fund it with my own money. This document told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't just a bully. She was an ignoramus. She operated under the assumption that the force of her will, codified in her ridiculous little rulebook, superseded a century and a half of established property law. She had mistaken the creation of her petty fiefdom for an act of sovereign conquest, believing its borders were fluid, expandable by sheer force of personality. My initial shock quickly cooled, crystallizing into a slow, dangerous calm. This was no longer a simple dispute. This was a campaign, and it would be conducted as such. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, methodical purpose. I stood up, walked to the footlocker, and retrieved the binder. Operation Overstep. I 3-hole punched the violation notice, the thick cardstock resisting with a satisfying crunch. I slid it into a page protector and snapped it into the first section of the binder, behind the tab labeled Inbound Hostile Communications. It was the first piece of evidence. The first shot fired in a war she had no idea she was about to lose. I sat back down at my desk, the binder open before me. It was no longer just a collection of papers. It was my field manual, my opposition research, my plan of attack. The campaign had been joined. The first phase of any successful operation is reconnaissance. You do not engage the enemy until you know their strength, their disposition, and most importantly, their weaknesses. Karen's violation notice was a gift. It provided me with her entire legal theory, flawed as it was. Her strength was the perceived authority of her HOA and the apathy or fear of the residents. Her weakness was the law itself. My first step was to acquire the enemy's field manual. A quick search online led me to the Whispering Pines public website, where, under a tab ironically labeled Community Harmony, I found a downloadable PDF of the complete covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and Rs. I printed all 84 pages of it. For the next 2 evenings, I did what I used to do with complex government contracts. I dissected it. With a red pen and a yellow highlighter, I went through it line by line. It was a monument to petty control, a truly breathtaking document of micromanagement. It dictated everything from the acceptable species of flowers, petunias, yes, roses, no, to the maximum number of seconds a garage door could remain open. But as I read, I started to see the cracks. The document was riddled with legal boilerplate copied and pasted from a dozen different sources, much of it contradictory. More importantly, it repeatedly referenced the properties described in Exhibit A. Exhibit A was the legal description of the land that comprised Whispering Pines Estates. My land was, of course, not in it. The entire 84-page document was, in relation to me, a work of complete fiction. This was the foundational weakness of her entire position. But I needed more than that. I needed to turn her offensive action into a fatal defensive liability. My JAG experience taught me that the best defense is a devastating, legally sound counteroffensive. Her letter mentioned placing a lien. In my state, filing a fraudulent property lien is a serious offense. It was time to find a higher authority. The next morning, I made a phone call to the County Planning and Zoning Department. I was put on hold, transferred twice, and finally connected to a man named Frank, whose voice oozed the weary boredom of a career bureaucrat. "Planning and zoning," Frank speaking, he mumbled. "Good morning, Frank," I began, keeping my tone polite and professional. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm calling about a property matter at 188 Vance Farm Road." I gave him my parcel number from memory. "I seem to be in a jurisdictional dispute with the adjacent homeowners association, and I was hoping you could clarify a few things for me." I could practically hear him shrug over the phone. "HOAs are civil matters, sir. We don't get involved in that." "I understand," I said calmly. "However, this involves a formal, written threat to place a lien on my property, which is zoned AG1 and is explicitly not part of their association for violations of their covenants, specifically for having a barn that was built in 1892. There was a pause. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. The weariness in his voice evaporated, replaced by a spark of interest. "Vance Farm Road, you said?" "Hold on a second." More clicking. "Okay, I see your parcel, 181.4 acres, zoned agricultural historic overlay. Right? And it's the Whispering Pines HOA next door." "That's the one," I confirmed. "And they're trying to fine you based on their rules?" he asked, a note of incredulity in his voice. "And threatening a lien, yes," I said. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, for crying out loud, not Karen again." That was it. That was the intel I was looking for. The enemy was known to the local authorities. She had a reputation. "You're familiar with the president, then?" I asked. "Familiar is a gentle way of putting it," Frank said, his voice now fully engaged. She calls here twice a week to complain about things that are none of her business. Sir, let me be unequivocal. Her covenants have the exact same legal authority over your property as a grocery store circular. None. Zero. If she attempts to file a lien, you should contact the district attorney's office for fraudulent filing and a private attorney for damages. Thank you, Frank. That's very clear, I said. I've documented the threat. One more thing. While I have you, has the HOA pulled any permits for major construction on the common area bordering my property? More clicking. Let's see. Whispering Pines. They pulled a fencing permit 6 months ago. Standard stuff, nothing else. Why do you ask? Just a premonition, I said. Thank you for your time, Frank. You've been very helpful. I hung up the phone and made a detailed entry in Operation Overstep, documenting the call with Frank, including his name, the date, and the substance of our conversation. He was now a potential friendly witness. The fact that no permits had been pulled for major construction was a piece of information I filed away. It felt important. With my own position legally solidified, it was time for the next phase. Building a resistance. A single complaint can be dismissed as a personal dispute. A dozen complaints become a pattern of abuse. I needed to see if Karen's tyranny was widespread or if I was simply her special project. That Saturday, I put on a simple pair of work pants and a polo shirt, a civilian uniform, and took a walk. I didn't enter Whispering Pines through the grand faux stone entrance. I walked along my side of the stone wall until I found a section where the development's soulless green lawn met my untamed meadow. I stepped over the low wall and found myself in enemy territory. It was even more sterile up close. Every lawn was a perfect, weedless carpet. Every shrub was trimmed into a perfect, unnatural sphere. It was a landscape of oppressive neatness. And yet, I could see the small acts of rebellion. A pink flamingo half hidden behind an air conditioning unit. A small, colorful wind spinner tucked into a flower bed, trying to look like a plant. A basketball hoop rolled just inside an open garage, as if ready to be deployed for a few precious, illicit minutes before being hidden away again. I saw an elderly woman tending a small patch of rose bushes by her front porch. They were beautiful, deep red blooms, clearly tended with love. They were also, according to the covenants I had read, contraband. I altered my course and walked toward her. She looked up as I approached, her eyes immediately darting around nervously. She was a small, frail-looking woman, probably in her late 70s. "Good morning," I said with a gentle smile. "Those are beautiful roses." She flinched, as if I had accused her of a crime. "Oh, thank you. I'm not supposed to have them. Karen, Mrs. Peterson, she says they're not on the approved list." "I'm Arthur Vance. I own the farm next door," I introduced myself. Her expression softened immediately. "Oh, the farm. You're the one she's so worked up about. I'm Mary Gable." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "She sent a letter about your barn, didn't she? She was bragging about it at the last social." "She did," I said. "She also sent me a fine for these roses' wild cousins growing in my meadow." A flicker of defiance sparked in Mrs. Gable's eyes. "She fined me $200 last month for these. My late husband planted the first one for me on our 50th anniversary. I told her I'd go to jail before I'd rip them out." "Good for you," I said, genuinely impressed. "Mrs. Gable, would you be willing to talk to me about your experiences with the HOA? I'm putting together some information." It was like opening a floodgate. She told me about the fines for leaving her garden hose out, for having a wreath on her door a week after Christmas, for her bird bath being 2 inches too tall. Her story was a litany of petty cruelties. I listened patiently, nodding, my mind recording every detail. As we spoke, a young couple, the Martinezes, were walking by with their 2 small children. They overheard parts of our conversation and slowed down, their expressions a mixture of fear and curiosity. I invited them over. It turned out they had been fined $300 because their 5-year-old daughter had drawn a hopscotch grid on the sidewalk with chalk. The violation notice had called it unapproved graffiti and property defacement. By the time I left Whispering Pines an hour later, I had spoken to 5 different families. I had a list of names, grievances, and dollar amounts. The seeds of a rebellion were not just planted, they were already sprouting. I returned to my study and spent the rest of the afternoon typing up my field notes, creating a new section in Operation Overstep titled Witness Statements and Pattern of Abuse. Karen's empire was built on a foundation of sand, and I could feel the tide beginning to turn. But I wasn't ready to strike. Not yet. The next move was hers. I had fortified my base, scouted the terrain, and made contact with local insurgents. Now I would wait for her to make her next, inevitable mistake. A week passed in deceptive quiet. The 30-day deadline on the violation notice ticked down. I did nothing. I did not send payment. I did not reply. In a conflict of this nature, silence can be a powerful weapon. It creates a vacuum of information, forcing your opponent to guess at your strategy. It often baits them into a reckless move. I needed to be away for a few days for a previously scheduled trip, a reunion with some of my old Army engineering comrades in North Carolina. I was hesitant to leave the theater of operations, but my fortifications were in place, and my intelligence network, a single, doughty, elderly woman with a contraband rose bush, was active. Mrs. Gable had my cell number. I returned 4 days later, pulling my truck down the long gravel drive toward my house. Something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. A deep, instinctual wrongness. It was the sound. A low, persistent hum that didn't belong. The hum of an industrial pump. I parked the truck and walked around the side of the house, my eyes drawn toward the boundary with Whispering Pines. My blood ran cold. There, straddling the property line, was a scene of raw, muddy devastation. A massive, kidney-shaped hole had been clawed out of the earth. It was about 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. A significant portion of it, at least a third, was clearly, unambiguously on my side of the stone wall, which had been crudely dismantled in that section. The hole was lined with a thick blue vinyl liner, and a network of PVC pipes snaked around its perimeter. At the far end, on her side of the line, sat a large pump and filter system, the source of the humming. They were building a swimming pool, a community pool, on my land. For a long moment, I just stood there staring. The sheer, monumental, galactic audacity of it was almost paralyzing. This was an escalation so far beyond what I had anticipated that it bordered on the surreal. This wasn't a letter. This wasn't a fine. This was an invasion, an occupation. The cold, methodical calm I had cultivated threatened to shatter. A hot, white spike of pure rage drove through me. I wanted to storm over there. I wanted to find Karen and... What? Yell? It would be useless. It was what she wanted, an emotional, chaotic reaction. I took a deep, steadying breath, then another. I closed my eyes, picturing the open binder on my desk. Discipline, method, strategy. The anger receded, replaced once more by that slow, dangerous focus. This was not a setback. This was a gift. She had just handed me the war on a silver platter. She had made a fatal, irrecoverable blunder. I went inside, straight to my study. I retrieved my high-resolution digital camera and a surveyor's tape. I walked back out and began the grim work of documenting the crime scene. I took hundreds of photos from every conceivable angle. I photographed the torn-up earth, the dismantled stone wall, the construction debris littering my property. I used the surveyor's tape to take precise measurements, photographing the tape itself to show exactly how far the construction had encroached. 15 feet, 7 inches at its deepest point. I documented it all. As I was finishing, a new thought struck me. I walked to the mailbox. Inside was another one of the heavy, cream-colored envelopes. My hand was perfectly steady as I took it back to the house. I slid it open. It was not another violation. It was an invoice. Notice of mandatory special assessment for community improvement, it read. It went on to describe, in glowing terms, the new resort-style community pool that would enhance the lives of all residents. And at the bottom, it listed the special assessment levied to pay for it. A one-time charge. My name was on the invoice. The amount due was $10,000. She was charging me for the pool that she was illegally building on my land. I placed the invoice into a page protector and snapped it into the binder. It was so perfect, so beautifully self-destructive, that it almost felt like a parody. She wasn't just walking into the trap. She was dancing into it. It was time to call in professional reinforcements. I knew property law, but I was retired. I needed someone with an active license to practice in the state. I needed a shark. I needed someone who would appreciate the tactical beauty of the situation I had so carefully constructed. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Mark Jessup, attorney at law," a sharp voice answered. "Mark," I said. "It's Arthur Vance." "Colonel Vance, good to hear your voice. Don't tell me you finally decided to unretire and help me sue some of these contractors into the Stone Age," he boomed. Mark had served under my command in the JAG Corps for 5 years before opening his own lucrative private practice specializing in exactly this kind of fight. He was brilliant, ruthless, and he hated bullies. "Not quite," I said. "I have a situation here, a property dispute. I think you'll find it interesting. I've opened a file, codename Operation Overstep." Mark was silent for a moment. Then he chuckled. "Arthur, you've been a civilian for 2 years, and you're already running counterinsurgency ops out of your study. I'm all ears." I spent the next 30 minutes giving him a concise, chronological brief, from the first confrontation to the discovery of the pool. I detailed the violation notice, my call with the county, my interviews with the other residents, and the $10,000 invoice. I spoke in the clipped, factual manner of a military report. When I finished, the line was quiet. I could hear the faint sound of him slowly tapping a pen on his desk. "Arthur," he said finally, his voice a low hum of professional admiration. "This isn't a case. This is a work of art. You haven't just built a case against this woman. You've built her a cage, a perfect kill box, and she has marched her entire army right into the middle of it." "So you'll take it?" I asked. "Take it," he exclaimed. "Arthur, I would pay you to let me take this case. This is the kind of case lawyers dream about. The facts are pristine. The opposition is arrogant and stupid, and the moral high ground is a mountain. My God, the sheer hubris of invoicing you for the trespass. It's magnificent." We agreed to meet the next day. I drove the hour to his office, the Operation Overstep binder sitting on the passenger seat like a briefcase full of bearer bonds. Mark's office was sleek and modern, a wall of glass overlooking the city. He was a tall, sharp man in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a grin that was all teeth. "Let's see the masterpiece," he said, gesturing to the binder. I laid it on his vast mahogany conference table. For the next hour, he went through it, page by page. He was no longer the jovial old army buddy. He was a predator scenting blood. He read my notes, examined the photos, and scrutinized the documents. He let out a low whistle when he saw the invoice. "Okay," he said, closing the binder with a decisive thud. "Here's the plan. We don't sue. Not yet. Suing is a long, grinding siege. We have the opportunity here for a lightning strike. We're going to send a letter, but it's not going to be a normal cease and desist. It's going to be a tactical nuke." He started pacing, energized. "We're not just going to address the HOA. We're going to send it via certified mail to Karen Peterson personally at her home address, and to every single member of her board personally. We will cite the specific state statutes she's violating regarding trespass, property damage, and, most deliciously, fraudulent lien threats. We will reference your conversation with Frank at the county and include the parcel number of the open investigation into their unpermitted construction. We will demand the immediate cessation of all work, the immediate removal of all equipment and materials from your property, and a written plan for the complete restoration of your land to its original condition, all within 10 business days." He paused, a wicked gleam in his eye. "And we're going to do one more thing. We're not going to demand they drop the $1,500 fine or the $10,000 assessment. We are going to politely inquire as to the preferred method of payment, just to see what they do. We let them walk deeper into the trap. We give them every opportunity to make it worse for themselves." "I like it," I said. It was an aggressive, confident strategy. "The goal here isn't to reason with her," Mark continued. "The goal is to put her in a position where her own ego and ignorance become our primary weapons. She'll ignore this, or she'll send back some blustering nonsense from the HOA's pet lawyer, who is probably some guy they pay a flat fee to write threatening letters about lawn gnomes. When she does, she pierces the corporate veil and exposes herself and her board members to massive personal liability. We are baiting the hook, Arthur, and she is a very, very hungry fish." Mark drafted the letter while I was there. It was a thing of beauty, a document of precise, menacing legal prose. It was polite, professional, and utterly terrifying. By the end of the day, 5 certified letters were on their way. 1 to the HOA, and 1 to Karen and each of the 3 other board members at their private residences. The trap was set. The bait was laid. Now we waited. The 10-day deadline stipulated in Mark's letter came and went. The response from Karen and her board was exactly what Mark had predicted. A thunderous, arrogant silence. The humming of the pool pump continued unabated. No one contacted me. No one contacted Mark. They were ignoring the tactical nuke, assuming it was a dud. This was a critical error on their part, but a predictable one. Tyrants, petty or otherwise, often mistake restraint for weakness. My refusal to engage in a shouting match and Mark's calm, professional letter were interpreted not as disciplined strategy, but as a lack of resolve. Then, on the 11th day, the escalation came, but not in the form I expected. I received an email. She believed she could rally the residents with a narrative of victimhood, painting me as a wealthy, unreasonable landowner trying to spoil their fun. She didn't realize that I had already conducted my own reconnaissance and alliance building within her territory. She thought she was leading me into an ambush. In reality, she was marching her forces onto a battlefield of my choosing. But before the meeting, she made one final, desperate move. The day before the scheduled show trial, a large flatbed truck from Aqua Dream Pools, Inc. rumbled to a stop at the edge of my property. A crew of 5 men began unloading equipment. They were going to try to finish the job, to present the community with a fait accompli. I had been waiting for this. I walked out of my house carrying 3 items: a copy of my official property survey, a copy of the stop work order I had since obtained from Frank at the county, and my phone, which was already recording high-definition video. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I walked calmly and deliberately to the dismantled section of my stone wall and stopped. The foreman, a burly man with a sunburned neck, saw me and sauntered over, a look of annoyance on his face. "Gotta ask you to step back, buddy," he said. "We've got work to do." "I'm sure you believe you do," I said, my voice level. "I am Arthur Vance, the owner of this property. I need to see your work permit." He scoffed. "We don't need a permit to talk to you. The HOA handles all the paperwork. Now back up." "I'm afraid that's incorrect," I said, holding up the county stop work order. "This is an official order from the County Planning and Zoning Department, citing your company for unpermitted construction and illegal encroachment. As of this moment, any work you perform here is a criminal misdemeanor." I then held up the survey. "And this is a certified survey map. As you can see, your excavation is nearly 16 feet onto my private property. That's criminal trespass and destruction of property." The foreman's bravado vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. He glanced from the papers in my hand to the half-dug hole behind him. He was a contractor, not an ideologue. He understood stop work orders and property lines. That's between you and the HOA, he stammered. "We just do what we're paid to do." "I understand," I said, my tone shifting from informational to ice cold. "But you need to understand this. As of the moment you were served with this notice," I held the stop work order out to him, "your company, and you personally as the foreman, are knowingly committing a crime. My attorney, Mark Jessup, whose letter you're about to receive, will be adding Aqua Dream Pools, Inc. as a defendant in the forthcoming lawsuit for damages, which will include the full cost of site remediation and legal fees. However," I paused, letting the weight of the threat settle, "if you pack up your equipment and leave my property immediately, I will instruct him to focus solely on the parties who fraudulently hired you." I held out a copy of Mark's letter, which I had prepared for this exact contingency. The foreman took it, his hand trembling slightly. He read the first paragraph, and his face went pale. He looked at me, at the phone in my hand calmly recording everything, and at the official county seal on the stop work order. He made a rapid tactical assessment. "All right, boys," he yelled to his crew. "Pack it up, we're done here." Within 15 minutes, their truck was loaded and rumbling away, leaving behind a half-finished, illegal, muddy hole. The direct action had failed, spectacularly, and I had the entire exchange on video. It was a beautiful piece of evidence, a short film about hubris meeting reality. The retreat of the pool crew seemed to be the final straw for someone inside the Whispering Pines command structure. That evening, as I was cataloging the video evidence in Operation Overstep, I received a call from a blocked number. "Is this Mr. Vance?" a nervous, mousy voice asked. "This is Arthur Vance," I confirmed. "My name is Gerald Finney. I'm the treasurer of the Whispering Pines HOA. He sounded like he was about to have a heart attack. I saw what happened today, with the pool company, and I got the letter from your lawyer. Sir, I am so sorry. I never wanted any of this. Karen, she railroads everything through. She told us the lawyer's letter was a bluff. He was the inside source, the defector. Every crumbling regime has one. "What do you want, Gerald?" I asked, my voice neutral. "I want out," he whispered frantically. "This is getting out of hand. A stop work order, lawsuits. She's going to ruin us. She told the board you were just a crazy old man and that the farm was technically common land because it looked like it should be." I almost laughed. "What do you have for me, Gerald?" "The books," he said. "The real books. She runs everything through a beautification fund that doesn't require line-item approval. It's a slush fund. I have the passwords. I can get you a full download of the QuickBooks file. Everything. The kickbacks to her brother-in-law's landscaping company. The legal fees she's spending on her personal vendettas. It's all in there." This was it. This was the kill shot. The evidence of her illegal trespass was damning. The evidence of her financial corruption would be fatal. "Send it," I said. An hour later, an email arrived with a password-protected zip file attached. The password was "No More Akaran." I opened it. It was a treasure trove. Spreadsheets, bank statements, invoices. Gerald was right. It was all there. A clear, unambiguous pattern of embezzlement, cronyism, and self-dealing, all hidden under the guise of beautification. I added the financial dossier to the binder. Operation Overstep was now complete. All I had to do was walk into her show trial the next evening and spring the trap. The Whispering Pines Estates Community Clubhouse was exactly what I expected. A large, characterless room with a vaulted ceiling, beige walls, and the faint, lingering smell of air freshener and desperation. By the time I arrived, 15 minutes early, the room was already packed. The air was thick with tension. I saw Mrs. Gable in the second row, who gave me a small, determined nod. I saw the Martinezes near the back, holding hands. It seemed Gerald's panicked whispers had spread. The entire community had turned out. I took a seat in the front row, directly facing the long table where the board would sit. I placed the Operation Overstep binder on my lap. It was nearly 5 inches thick now, a dense, heavy brick of pure, unassailable fact. A few minutes later, Karen and her 2 board members made their entrance. They were the only ones who seemed oblivious to the mood in the room. Karen was wearing a severe black blazer, an outfit she likely thought projected power. She looked like a provincial dictator about to address her cowed subjects. Her 2 allies, a thin, nervous-looking woman and a portly man who looked permanently confused, flanked her like unwilling hostages. Gerald, the treasurer, was conspicuously absent. Karen banged a small, toy-like gavel on the table. "This emergency meeting of the Whispering Pines HOA is now in session," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. She launched immediately into her prepared speech, a masterpiece of self-pity and righteous indignation. She spoke of the beautiful new amenity that would enrich all their lives. She painted a picture of a hostile, uncooperative outsider, a man of immense privilege who refused to be a good neighbor, who was now using aggressive legal threats to stand in the way of progress. She never used my name, only referring to me as the adjacent landowner. "He is trying to bully your board," she declared, her voice rising, "and deny your children a place to swim this summer. We cannot, and we will not, be intimidated." When she finished, there was a smattering of weak, obligatory applause from a few people in the back. Most of the room remained silent, their eyes flicking between Karen and me. "The board has discussed this matter," Karen continued, "and we are proposing a motion to create a legal defense fund to combat this baseless aggression. This will require a special assessment of $200 per household." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. This was not the reaction she had anticipated. "Before you vote on that," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the noise. I didn't stand up. I didn't need to. All eyes were already on me. "I believe the community is entitled to see the full picture." Karen's face hardened. "You are not a member of this association. You have no right to speak at this meeting." "On the contrary," I said, standing up slowly and placing the binder on the table in front of me with a heavy thud. "Since a significant portion of your community pool is on my land, and since you have invoiced me for $10,000 to pay for it, I believe I have what is legally referred to as standing. And my attorney, who is standing in the back of the room, agrees." Every head swiveled. There, leaning against the back wall, was Mark Jessup, impeccably dressed, a slight, predatory smile on his face. He gave a small wave. The sight of a real lawyer in the room sent a shockwave of panic across the faces of Karen's two board members. "I have prepared a short presentation," I said, pulling a USB drive from my pocket. I walked to the front of the room where a projector was set up for Karen's triumphant announcement. I plugged in the drive. "I believe it will clarify some things for everyone." Before Karen could object, the first image flashed onto the screen. It was the county GIS map, my property in yellow, hers in pink, the red line of the boundary stark and clear. "This," I began, my voice calm and authoritative, like I was briefing a cabinet secretary, "is the legal boundary between my farm and this development. It is not a suggestion. It is a matter of settled law and recorded deeds going back to the 19th century. Click. The next image appeared. An aerial photograph showing the half-dug pool, a muddy scar across the red line. This is the community amenity as of yesterday. As you can see, approximately 1/3 of the structure by surface area is illegally located on my property. Click. A close-up of my dismantled stone wall. This is the destruction of my historic property marker. Click. The video I took of the confrontation with the pool foreman began to play, silent, on the screen. And this is the construction foreman of Aqua Dream Pools, acknowledging the county stop work order I had served on him yesterday morning before he and his crew fled the scene. The room was dead silent. I could hear Karen's ragged breathing. "The fine of $1,500 for my historic barn and the special assessment of $10,000 for this illegal construction, both of which were sent to me, constitute attempted fraud," I stated flatly. "My attorney has already prepared the civil complaint." I paused, letting the weight of it all sink in. "But this is not just about me." I turned to the audience. "Mrs. Gable?" Mary Gable stood up, her voice trembling but clear. "She fined me $200 for the roses my husband planted for me. She called them unapproved flora." "Mr. Martinez?" I called out. He stood up, his wife clutching his arm. $300 for sidewalk chalk. She threatened to call Child Protective Services on us for creating a blighted environment for our own kids. A dam of fear broke. One by one, people started standing up, shouting out their own stories. Fines for holiday decorations. Fines for the wrong color welcome mat. Fines for a barbecue grill being visible from the street. The room devolved into a chorus of grievances, a public airing of years of petty tyranny. Karen was on her feet, her face purple with rage, banging the toy gavel. "Order! Order! This is slander! These are all legitimate enforcement actions." I held up a hand, and surprisingly, the room quieted. They wanted to see how it ended. "It's not slander if it's true," I said, turning back to the projector. "But the question is, where does all that money go?" Click. The final phase of the attack. A spreadsheet filled the screen. It was the HOA's budget. I highlighted a line item. Beautification and Contingency Fund. $87,500. According to your treasurer, Gerald Finney, who provided me with these documents out of a sense of civic duty and legal self-preservation, this fund requires no specific board approval for expenditures. Click. Another spreadsheet. A list of payments from that fund. You'll see here, I said, using a laser pointer to trace the lines, over $40,000 in payments made in the last year to a company called K's Clean Cut Landscaping. A fine name. A public record search reveals that the sole proprietor of this company is a Mr. Kevin Peterson. Your brother-in-law, I believe, Karen? A collective gasp went through the room. And here, I continued, my voice merciless, over $20,000 in legal retainers paid to the firm that sends out these threatening letters. And here, a series of debit card expenses for meals, gas, and even on one occasion, a spa day, all classified under community outreach. I turned off the projector and faced the room. Karen was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Her two board members looked like they were about to be physically ill. It seems to me, I said, my voice ringing with finality, that this community has a much larger problem than my barn. You have a board that has engaged in illegal construction, attempted fraud, and appears to be using your money as a personal slush fund. Therefore, I would like to propose a motion. I looked directly at Karen. I move that a special assessment be levied immediately and exclusively upon the current board members, Karen Peterson, Cynthia Miller, and Bob Jones, in their personal capacity, to cover all costs associated with the removal of the illegal pool structure, the complete restoration of my property, and all legal fees incurred by me as a result of their actions. Furthermore, I move that an independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances be conducted immediately. Mark, from the back, spoke up. I'll second that motion. Karen finally found her voice. It was a panicked screech. You can't do that. That's illegal. On the contrary, Mark said, walking calmly down the center aisle. It's perfectly legal. It's called piercing the corporate veil. When board members engage in acts that are grossly negligent, fraudulent, or outside the scope of their authority, they lose the protection of the corporation and become personally liable. And I have a 5-inch binder here that says you've done all three. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a unified roar of approval. All in favor of the motion, someone yelled. A forest of hands went up. Aye! The sound was deafening. All opposed? Silence. Karen and her two cronies stared out at the sea of angry faces, utterly defeated, but it wasn't over. Mrs. Gable stood up again, her voice strong and unwavering. I move for a vote of no confidence in the current board, and for their immediate removal from office, effective now. Seconded, shouted Mr. Martinez. The vote was instantaneous and unanimous. It was a public execution. Karen stared, her face a crumbling mask of disbelief. She grabbed her purse, pushed back from the table, and fled the room, not even bothering with the door, but shoving her way through a side exit into the night. Her reign was over. In the immediate aftermath of the coup, a sense of stunned relief filled the clubhouse. The community, so long divided and ruled by fear, was suddenly unified. An interim board was nominated and elected on the spot. To his visible horror, Gerald Finney was unanimously voted in as the interim president. A shell-shocked Mrs. Gable was named vice president, and a very eager Mr. Martinez became the new secretary. Their first official act, proposed by Mrs. Gable, was to pass a motion formally apologizing to me on behalf of the community. Their second was to void, retroactively, every fine that had been issued by Karen's board for aesthetic violations. A wave of cathartic applause swept the room. It felt like a liberation. The following weeks were a whirlwind of cleanup, both legal and literal. Mark, on behalf of the new HOA board, filed a civil suit against Karen and her two former cronies to recoup the embezzled funds. The district attorney's office, armed with the binder and Gerald's testimony, opened a criminal investigation into fraud and embezzlement. Karen, I later heard, had put her house up for sale in a desperate attempt to cover her mounting legal bills. The most immediate problem was the giant, muddy hole straddling the property line. The new board, as part of their apology, offered to pay for the removal and restoration. I declined. This was my land, and I would be the one to heal it. I hired a local excavation company, a different one, to fill the hole. They brought in truckload after truckload of clean, rich topsoil. They carefully rebuilt the section of my great-grandfather's stone wall that had been torn down, using the original stones which I had carefully stacked to one side. Within a week, the ugly scar on the land was gone, replaced by a smooth, dark expanse of earth. But I didn't want to just plant grass. That felt like a surrender to the aesthetic of whispering pines. I wanted to make a statement. I drove to the oldest feed store in the county and bought a 50-pound sack of winter wheat seed. My family hadn't grown a crop on this land in 50 years, but the knowledge was in my bones. With a broadcast spreader, I walked the reclaimed patch of land, casting the seeds in wide, even arcs. I seeded right up to the newly repaired stone wall, turning the site of Karen's failed conquest into a tangible symbol of my family's heritage. A field. A few months later, the new board hosted a community barbecue. They held it in the common area, right next to the stone wall. I was invited as the guest of honor. It was a strange experience. The same people who had feared and avoided me were now shaking my hand, clapping me on the back, and offering me plates of food. The atmosphere of fear was gone, replaced by a genuine sense of neighborliness. Children were drawing on the sidewalks with chalk. Mr. Martinez had a brand new basketball hoop set up in his driveway. Mrs. Gable's roses were in full, glorious, and legal bloom. The gate between our worlds, once a source of conflict, was now open. Tonight, 6 months after the battle in the clubhouse, I sat on my front porch. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the landscape. My gaze fell on the patch of land where the pool was supposed to be. It was no longer a patch of dirt. It was a field of young wheat, green and vibrant, swaying gently in the evening breeze. It was beautiful. It was real. On the hearth inside, the last pages of Operation Overstep were curling into ash. The binder had served its purpose. The campaign was over. The intelligence had been gathered. The alliances forged. The enemy vanquished. Peace, the deep, profound quiet I had retired to find, had been threatened. I had been forced to go to war to preserve it. I took a sip of my bourbon, the smooth, warm liquid a welcome contrast to the cool evening air. I listened to the sound of the wind in the pines, my pines, the real pines, and the distant chirp of crickets. The hum of the pool pump was a fading memory. All that remained was the silence. A petty tyrant had tried to steal my peace. She had failed, because she never understood that true power doesn't come from a rule book or a title on a lanyard. It comes from knowing your ground, fighting for it with discipline and truth, and remembering that even the smallest kingdom is worth defending. And my kingdom was finally, blessedly, quiet again.